sharing your stories and playing your songs on Graham's JFDI Show.
Good evening. A very warm, actually a very chilly welcome to High G's in the rooftops of deepest, darkest.
A very warm,
Lothian,
actually a
West
very
Lothian.
chilly welcome to High G's in the rooftops of deepest, darkest. A very warm.
Oh, that's better. I'm not sure if that came across as a bit of an echo there. There's no intentional reverb on tonight. I think I might just have had a tab open with YouTube. So for anybody watching on YouTube, apologies. Anyway, welcome to the JFDI podcast on the 24th of November. I am really excited with tonight's guest for you. And what is super exciting for me is that, unlike a lot of people that have been on here before that are ex-forces colleagues of mine, I've had some coaches on and had a number of other people that have usually in some way my path has crossed professionally. And tonight's guest, I met him at my very first Wim Hof workshop held in West Lothian, and he came along, and we got chatting. It was a fantastic day, but once I heard a little bit of his story, I had to ask him to come on, because the journey is unlike anything that you've ever heard on this podcast before. He's an actor, he is a writer, and I think it's safe to say most certainly the first activist that we've had on here. And what do we mean by activist, do you say? Well, I've listened to an audiobook that he wrote, and his explanation is simple, and I might come on to ask him, we'll talk a little bit more about it. But in his words, someone who does what he can to make the world better, why would I not have on someone who does that? So, ladies and gentlemen, give a big, warm High G's and JFDI podcast welcome to Matthew McVarish.
Good evening.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for that lovely intro. Bless you.
Well, listen, when you said that you would send me the biog, and I was listening to the book. I started listening to your audiobook last week, and I knew I was going to have some train journeys on, and I thought, perfect. So as it transpired, I've listened to the rest of it all today, and wow. I mean, wow. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil anything that's in there for anybody that wants to watch it. We've got a load of questions that things that I want to ask you. A couple of things that I'll touch on that I really loved about. Let's say about your style of delivery, and the way that periodically through your delivery of what is extremely delicate subject matter, you stopped. Your voice throughout is extremely soothing, and at points where you move from one chapter to another, or even like phase to the next, the way in which you stop and invite people to use their breath and just to focus on their breath. It will come as no surprise to anybody watching that I absolutely loved that bit as well, because it just grounds you, your breath, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like a reset button, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think because I trained in acting, obviously, so I spent 3 years lying on my back doing deep breaths before. Like every day in first year, you have to do limber every morning. It was 2 hours of breathing every day, and by the end of first year, your intercostals are like bulging. But you really, I feel really blessed that I've had that training, because I feel at any point you can just get a grip of yourself.
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. Yes, I like a reset button. So for those that watch and wonder why we've kicked off and all of a sudden we're talking about breathing, the podcast, the JFDI podcast, is all based around music. And so you've given me 5 songs, and unless, of course, there's an order that you would like, I'm just gonna kick off right at the start.
Okay.
And we'll use those questions to kind of find out why they're important to you. A little bit about your background, a little bit about your journey through life to where we're at just now, and we'll see where it goes from there. That's what we do.
Sweet.
So should we kick off with your first song?
Aye, let's jump in. Nat
King Cole and Unforgettable. I said last night, what a way to start. So what's the story with this?
This song will be the first dance at my wedding. So, because you said send me some songs that have meaning, so I didn't do like a chronological periods of my life songs. These I just sent you the songs that for me are the big moments. So, my fiance and I, we met 11 years ago.
Yeah.
We both lived in London, and everyone meets online. We met online, and then we were kind of seeing each other the way that you don't make anything official. So we were seeing each other in 2011, and then one of my plays was going to tour in the States, so I was gone for 3 months. But we'd kind of just met, and then I was gone for 3 months. Yeah. So it was very, very non-committal back then. And then when we got back, we kind of actually what happened was I was in London and I was in a cafe in Soho, and he walked past the window with somebody else. And I was like, because we hadn't committed, we hadn't even stayed in touch over the 3 months because it was that. And he'd obviously met someone, and we looked at each other, and he just looked straight ahead and kept walking. And I was like, oh God. So, but weirdly, it was his first date with that guy, and they apparently went up the street. They went into some pizza place, and James, my partner, he went to the bathroom and kind of had a think, and then he came out and said to the guy, "I'm really sorry, my friend's in hospital," or I don't know what his excuse was, and he just left this poor fella. Came back to me, and so then we got back together, and then I was going to leave again. I left for 2 years on a tour, so I was gone for 2 years, and sorry, I'm drinking fizzy water, which isn't a good idea. I got back after 2 years, and I was in Europe, and I couldn't come back from that tour. So I ended up working. I got offered a job in Bangkok, so I was working in Thailand, and the job in Thailand asked me to speak at an event in Berlin. So I flew to Berlin. So I'm jumping around the houses here. And my friend in Berlin that I was staying with said, "Whatever happened to that guy, James?" And I was like, because I've just been flying around the world. So I messaged him, and this was 2015. And I messaged him, and he replied immediately. And he said, "If you're ever in London, come and see me." So I changed my flight, and I was in London the next night. And we've been together ever since, like inseparable. And we're getting married next week. So it's the idea that even though we met 11 years ago, I was gone for about 3 years of our initial few years, but we couldn't forget each other. Like, that was the thing. It was just unforgettable.
Yeah. I love that. And do you know what? It's also what I love about doing this, because we've kind of we've started at something that's, like you say, you jumped around a little bit, but actually is very relevant to now, and brings us bang up to date, and with a wonderful celebration just around the corner as well.
Yeah, literally just was it 9 days or something?
9 days.
And it feels funny getting married at a time when the World Cup is in a country where I'd be arrested and the two of us would be put in jail, which would be the safer option, because if we were accosted on the street by the locals, it would probably be more dangerous. But
there's a lot of crazy laws in many countries around the world, right?
Yeah,
something that's fairly close to your heart, correct?
Absolutely. And I think because I spend a lot of my time and energy focused on child protection and like as an activist. And one of the ironic things, like I was talking to a journalist in Bucharest in Romania, and I said, homophobia really breeds pedophilia. And she said, "Oh yes, I know." And I was like, "I don't think you understand what I just said." I was like, homophobia breeds pedophilia, not homosexuality. That's the assumption. I said, but if you live in a territory where the worst thing you can possibly be is gay, then for the boys who've been abused by men and the girls abused by women, they'll never tell anyone, because there's this stigma that, like if you're abused by someone of the same sex, then somehow that makes you gay. And so if the territories, and there's obviously lots of them around the world, any particularly religious territory is creating a wall of silence that is incubating the sexual abuse of children. So yeah, sorry, I've got on a rant there.
No, absolutely. Listen, so you touched on a few really important things there about children that have been abused. And something that you're extremely passionate about changing laws and protecting, like you said, child protection. So let's roll the clock all the way back to your childhood, and let me ask you about events, your environment as a childhood, most importantly, that you feel has kind of formed a number of the things that you've already touched on, but mentally made you who you are today.
Yeah, so as an activist, I focus on the complete abolition of the statute of limitations, which is a law that stops victims of childhood sexual abuse pressing charges. But the reason I focus on that law is because when I was a kid, my uncle regularly abused me sexually and three of my brothers. Now, this was in East Kilbride in the 80s and 90s. And at that time, I mean, Scotland in the 90s in a Catholic school wasn't, you couldn't really speak about these things. This was way back. This was before Michael Jackson and the Catholic Church in Savile. No one was talking about this in the 90s. So for me, this kind of carried on until I was 13. And eventually, I don't remember when it started actually, but it was just always something that was happening. And then when I was 13, I finally stood up to him and kind of told him to stop touching me. He was my godfather and my uncle. And then that was it. I had to pretend that I was fine and we were fine, because he was still in the house for about 2 years. And then when I was 15, my older brother kind of collapsed from stress. He was emotionally overwhelmed. He was doing his finals at uni and he just had a bit of a kind of meltdown. And during that period, he disclosed that he had been abused by our uncle. And at that moment, I realized it wasn't just me. I'd always thought it was just me. And then I realized that because I witnessed him have a kind of mental health break, I realized when I was 15 that if I don't get help and if I don't talk about this stuff, then in 10 years' time, I'm going to be in a hospital bed, unable to function. So in a way, that was a blessing. It taught me that you need to address your mental health. So I left home when I was 17, got a job in Wolverhampton in theatre, and I went down and I started therapy when I was 17. And that, for me, is why I feel that I've been able to regain a lot of my life. I meet survivors who, they might be older than me, might be 50s and 60s, and they've never really spoken about it. So even though I'm 39, I'm like more than 20 years down the road of healing. And that's why I can go and sit in the UN and speak to various governments and stuff about this in a very calm way. I still get triggered, absolutely, but I think, you know, that recovery is a direction, it's not a destination. You know, when you're always traveling towards getting better. I'm just 20 years down that road, you know.
Yeah.
But it's you're never too old to start healing.
And so I guess what would you say, and it's in terms of that healing, you had got a job in Wolverhampton. What was it? Was there one thing that kind of opened the floodgates for that healing? Was because obviously a lot of that had been kept secret, you know, both you know, no police involvement, nothing really outside the family, and you know.
Well, that was the thing. Like, I spoke to a therapist and I gave him a false name because I didn't want to. So where are we now? 2000, 22 years ago, and I didn't want him to run to the police when I disclosed which would have to happen these days. So I gave him a false name and I kind of revealed as much as I could about the situation. So is, you know, to decompress, but without giving too much legal information. And then for me, like, I was starting to heal. I went to university, studied acting. I became an actor. I moved into kids TV. Pretty much was my first job. Well, I did Taggart and stuff, and then I was on CBeebies for a while.
You weren't inside one of those.
I wasn't Tinky Winky. No, I was in a show called Me Too, unfortunately, because in 2018, when the Me Too movement happened, the BBC had to drop the show. But it was basically Balamory. It was a remake of Balamory and set in a city. And I was the guy on the train who made cheese toasties. So I did that. We did like 150 episodes. So then I was 25 and I was working in TV and theatre as an actor, and I'd started writing theatre. And one of my other brothers had a breakdown.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, oh, you know, so this was 2007. My uncle, who I knew was dangerous, I'd told him to leave me alone, and that was it. I just left him to it, and I didn't go to the police. And I kind of realized that our silence, all of us were kind of mentally having to do what we could to get by. And my brothers really weren't coping. They hadn't gone for help the way I had. And I realized that our silence was dangerous by not reporting him. I mean, he was a school teacher and he had football teams of young boys. And then that suddenly hit me like, what are we doing? We need to go to the police. We need to do this now. But so 2007, I mean, again, it's still not easy to speak to your brothers about this kind of stuff. It's heavy, dark stuff, and it's difficult. So because I was beginning to write theatre professionally, I wrote a play, and the play was about literally two brothers who for the first time speak about what was done to them as kids. And the play was performed in Glasgow, and I invited the Moira Anderson Foundation, who are in the centre of Scotland, and they support survivors of all ages who have been sexually abused in childhood. So they support survivors of childhood sexual abuse, but you can be any age. It can be historical abuse a long time ago, or it can be something that's just happened. So I invited them to come and hold a kind of post-show discussion, and to kind of, people might be triggered and stuff in the audience. And I invited my brothers to come and see it. And I warned them that it was going to be heavy. And luckily, Sandra Brown, OBE, she's the founder of the foundation. She came along and just guided us through this discussion, which we needed to have. And we'd been silent by that point because my oldest brother is 20 years older than me. He's 10 years older than me. So his silence had lasted for 20 years since the abuse. By that point, for me, it'd been 10 years. So for 20 years, we'd been silent, but within just days of my play and that discussion, we made a report to the police. My uncle was immediately arrested and prosecuted and sentenced. So the play, which was a play, it's a piece of art. It was a drama. It was based on real life, but it was fiction. It catalyzed this real life event that had to happen in our family. And I thought, wow, if that did that for my family, maybe it'll do it for other families. So we took the play to New York, ran off Broadway, and then we toured. And people in the audience would come up to me afterwards and say how they'd never told anyone this before, and then they would disclose to me. And I'll be honest, that got intense because that started happening everywhere, across everywhere. But then I was encouraging people to speak out, and then I learned about the statute of limitations, which is the law that's the time limit on reporting. So I was going to people and saying, you need to report this if your abuser is still in contact with children. And they would say, well, we would, but maybe they would say, we did report it, but that crime is expired because it was 10, 15 years ago. Now, in the UK, we don't have that law, but they have it across the States, and they have it in various countries across the EU. So once I'd learned that, and it's not about revenge, it's not about compensation, it's about child protection. It's about the authorities in some places who are aware of dangerous individuals who are in contact with children, and they can't arrest them because the evidence they have on them has expired, and that's just mental. So that was what inspired me to do an action against that, and the plan basically was to ask every government in the EU to remove that law. And so I decided to do that on foot. So I left London and walked to Paris, and then I walked from Paris to Luxembourg to Brussels, and I walked around the EU. It took me just under 2 years. I walked about, it was about 50 kilometers a day, so about 30 miles a day. I slept in a van that followed me. And it didn't start, it grew. It grew and grew. So initially, when I got to Paris, no one knew what I was doing. I walked in a kilt to be conspicuous,
But you walked in a kilt?
Yeah.
Somewhere knocking on about, what, 10,000 miles?
Yeah, it was about 10,000 miles.
In a kilt?
When you were asking me for songs that are meaningful, I was going to give you the Proclaimers 500 Miles, but not because I like that song, but because I absolutely hate it, because that song has been sang at me in every European accent. It's like, and I hate it. When I hear it, I'm like, oh God, those were long days.
Crikey. All right, so that's a fair chunk from from the start of your healing process through helping like your own brothers and each other, and then other people to this point of taking that message through the medium of a play, and then taking that across Europe. That is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And I want to find out. I want everyone else to know what's kind of happened next, but JFDI podcast, Matty, and we've only done one song, so it's because I was going to let you keep going, but you mentioned the Proclaimers and they're not on the list.
No.
But the Chieftains are, and a song by them called Peggy Gordon.
Yes, I love this. So the Peggy Gordon is my mum's party piece. Anytime you have those parties in the house, when the guitars come out, we're a very musical family. I'm the youngest of 7, actually. So, where everyone plays instruments, and my mum would always sing Peggy Gordon. But when I got back from the walk around Europe, I hadn't seen her, the whole time I was away, obviously. And it was her brother that abused me. So she and I had never spoken about it. We'd never, how do you even start that conversation? But when I was walking, my last day of walking was from George Square in Glasgow to Edinburgh Castle. It was 47 miles. That was my last day. And then there was this ceremonial last mile from Edinburgh Castle to the Scottish Parliament. And we had like over 1,000 people did the last mile with me in pipe bands and stuff. But that last day of walking, I walked through, the old road for Glasgow to Edinburgh, through like Bathgate and all that.
Yeah, one that just comes just down past, me.
Yeah. So that day, I have an aunt who lives in Bathgate, and I hadn't seen her in years either. And she was waiting for me at the side of the road when I passed, and that was her brother too. And so she says I sat in her car for 10 minutes. I didn't drive, obviously. I sat in the car and spoke, and then I kept walking. And she told me that when my uncle was sentenced, he wrote to all his siblings, like her and my mum. Not my mum, but he wrote to all his siblings, and said that he decided to move to London and that he didn't like mobile phones and he didn't like the Facebook, so he would basically not be contactable for a few years. Like, just try to cover his arse, lying to them, still even being prosecuted, and he was still lying.
He wrote these letters from
to
jail?
His siblings. I guess so. I guess he must have.
Yeah.
I guess because he was taken straight away in handcuffs. So, and I was so furious that had happened. And this was me on the last day of having just walked around Europe, and I'm getting this information that even after sentencing, he still tried to cover his arse and lie. So that was like a sledgehammer, and I'm still got 10 miles or something to Edinburgh. But then my aunt told me this thing I didn't know. She said, but then your mum phoned me. My mum phoned all of her siblings and said, I want you to know what he did to my children. And my mum was our biggest champion. And she basically, no uncertain terms, made sure that they all knew the truth. So that was another thing I didn't know. So then I went ahead and I finished the walk, and there was a few crazy days of media and stuff. And then I collapsed from exhaustion. I didn't collapse on the walk. I collapsed a week after. So then I recovered for about a month. I was invited over to the States just to breathe. So I was gone for a while. Anyway, I finally got back from the States, and I have been gone for 2 years. And I go and see my mum, and I'm going to have this conversation. And I went to see her, and I was like, what's going on? And she said, well, Matthew's in America. And I was like, oh, I'm Matthew. And my mum was sharp as a tack. And we realized that she was confused. And what it was her kidneys. She's developing sepsis. So that was on the Saturday. And then we took her glasses off, and her eyes were yellow. And we got her straight into hospital. One of my brothers is a paramedic. My sister's a pharmacist, and they knew immediately this was bad. So yeah, that was all really sudden. I never got the chance to talk to her. So she passed away on the following Saturday. Oh. But yeah, it was just such a mad whirlwind. But so the Chieftains track that I gave you, when weirdly we all came around, like the doctor said on the Wednesday, like, she's got no functioning organs, we'll need to just turn the machines off. So we turned it off on the Wednesday, and they kind of assumed that she would die within an hour or two, and she didn't. And then so that was Wednesday. Thursday, there was doctors coming from other wards just to witness that this woman's still alive. Her heart wouldn't stop beating. She lived until the Saturday. And the doctors were all like, I hope you've all inherited your mother's heart, because that is astounding. But for those 3 days when you were waiting for mum to die, we were all in shock. Like, this came out of nowhere. But I remember just playing that track. And weirdly, it's really rare that we're all together because there's 7 of us. But we all sat around the bed that whole week. And in the funny way, it was the nicest time I've ever spent with my family, because we just laughed and told stories and obviously cried. But that song now reminds me of that week, which was just gorgeous. Although I never got to speak to her because she didn't really regain consciousness. Yeah. But yeah, so that song, when I hear it, just blows me away. But at the wedding next week, my dad's going to walk in before me, and that's the track he's going to walk into as well.
That's lovely. Absolutely lovely. And you've kind of... It's not often on here. I'm kind of not so much stuck for words, but just a little bit choked up, mate.
I am too. What are you doing to me? I wasn't expecting this. Yeah.
So listen, you mentioned that you were a musical family. So do you have a particular instrument of choice? Do you play one or more instruments?
Yeah, I play guitar, and I did play saxophone for a while, but I haven't in a while. And I guess, no, I was going to say I play the baran, but I tap on a drum, but I wouldn't say I would do that. I do that at parties, but I wouldn't do that on a stage.
Right. And at the wedding, is there any expectation of a family jam session at any point during the ceremonies?
We've scheduled that for the day after, because people are coming from America and everywhere, really, actually. So we've got the wedding on Saturday, and then Sunday we've got a party just a party, which would be guitars and drums and really Celtic stuff. But yeah, I mean the wedding's great. Like obviously we've got a Ceilidh band and stuff for the wedding. I've got Tom Ury's performing.
Oh yes, Tom Ury. He sings God's Best Friend.
Well, no, I sing that. It's on Tom's album, but that's one of my tracks.
Is that one of your tracks?
Yeah, I wasn't sure I put that in as well, but because it was a meaningful song. But
yeah,
so Tom's.
This was kind of, we've jumped, but it's actually it's great because that was another one of the tracks on there. Yeah. Okay,
Tom.
so you've caught me on the hop because the one thing that I normally do, should we share with our viewers? Normally I listen to all of the songs when I'm getting ready, and it kind of, so I listen to the words, and sometimes then I'll base a lot of questions on maybe on the words or maybe what the song says to me. And what the song says to me invariably will not be necessarily the same thing that it says to, my guests. But I didn't have the opportunity to listen to the songs tonight because, well, yes, we were waiting on trains from Glasgow Queen Street Station for an hour and 45 minutes. But so Tom Ury or God's Best Friend. Yeah.
So Tom's my we were flatmates for years. He's an actor as well. He was, if you're into River City, he's Big Bob. But he's also an incredible musician, and he and I have a publishing deal together as songwriters. So we used to. Well, I would normally write lyrics, and he would write the music. But God's Best Friend was a song that I wrote about my gran, basically. But it's a song that I wrote about 15 years ago, and it's nice. The reason I love that song is because it's people say it's about their gran. It's about my gran, but when they hear it, they say and it's been played at about 7 grans funerals, like that I've never met. But I've really cornered that lucrative market of grans funerals there. But my nephews now play that song at parties, and that's why I love it. I think because it's they think it's about my mum, but it's not. It's about her mum. But it's a very Scottish song.
Fantastic. Crikey, not just an actor, writer, and activist, but also songwriter as well.
I think that, I wasn't sure if I should put one of my own songs in, but you asked me for meaningful songs in it. I think that's a song, like, for me, that's the only song that I've had that's really got a life that's nothing to do with me. People know that song that I, that play it at parties and play it at funerals and stuff like that, which I like. Obviously, you create something, you put out there, you want it to be meaningful for people.
Yeah.
But I think I struggle to explain to people what it is I do. And I think that's because since the Industrial Revolution, people are supposed to have a trade, or they're supposed to have, we're pigeonholed into this is what I do. But if you go back before that, it was very common that, I'm not going to compare myself to Da Vinci, but he was a sculptor and a painter and an inventor and a philosopher and an anatomist. You could be anything you want to be. And I think today, especially for when you've got an agent, they want to be able to market you. So they want to say, this is what you are. Whereas if you're a human being and you're naturally creative, all human beings want to do different things, and create in different mediums, and there's nothing to stop you doing that. But it's difficult. It's difficult for people to promote you. But I do find it hard to explain what I do. But
multifaceted, that's what I would say. Very much so. So can we go back, because we were partly before we skipped on to the chieftains, just because it was a nice little interlude talking about the Proclaimers, about your walk across Europe. Now, where I wanted to pick up, you kind of talked about stopping through different countries, and you talked about the statute of limitations. So can you just talk a little bit more about what you were doing during the when you weren't walking, basically, and the kind of people that you had got in front of. You kind of mentioned there was press attention, but the drive there was to fundamentally, ask them. I always think activists demand. They demand. They demand in the interests of making the world a better place, right? But can you just talk a little bit more about, the kind of people that you met and the and the kind of conversations that you had across Europe, and how they differed based on, how the laws were different.
Yeah. I get what you mean about activist demand. I mean, there is that form of activism where you're radical and you do big stunts and stuff like that. For me, the walk was very peaceful, and I was inspired by a couple of people. Gandhi did the March of the Salt, which was so non-violent. And then there was also Francis of Assisi, some people call Saint Francis, and he walked barefoot to Rome and was recognized by Pope Innocent as divine. And so there's been times in history when people just walk and it's so non-threatening, but so I think there's a kind of dignity in that, because there's no dignity in being sexually abused. But if you look, what is it, over 100 years ago, women marched for the right to vote, and then 60 years ago we have black and white inequality in America, and people walked silently for equal rights. And then 10 years later, you've got gay people starting to march for their equal rights. And there's kids being sexually abused every day, every second. And the kids have never really organized their big walk because they can't, because they're children. They never will organize a big walk because they can't. Yeah. So when it comes to children's rights, they only exist if we uphold them. So we need to do the walking. So that for me was what it was about. And obviously when you walk 10,000 miles, you attract the media. And so that was why it had to be that extraordinarily long. It had to be newsworthy. So we got media and TV, radio, newspapers in over 30 languages. And in many countries in Eastern Europe, I was the first male survivor to ever speak publicly about being sexually abused. But that was the awareness aspect of it. But there was a very specific political ask. So I would go and knock on the doors of the governments. And initially, of course, nobody listened to me. But in Luxembourg, the British ambassador said, "Would you like me to walk with you?" So she walked with me, which brought out the press. And then suddenly she contacted all the British embassies in the EU. And then when I arrived at the city, and I didn't do this by myself, I had incredible volunteers. There was Amanda, she would help me. She would go ahead to the city that I was walking to and help me set up meetings with press and stuff like that. I had 6 different follow drivers throughout the walk. I had one guy called Stig, he was in the van for like 14 months. So, wow. But so there was thousands of people involved, and I'm not giving the impression that I did this by myself. That is not the case. It was a massive operation. Eventually, thousands of people involved and make it possible. But so when I would get to the city, the British embassy would help me get to the ministers of the governments in that country, and they would help me get to the press. And then I would meet some of the NGOs, the organizations who were, sometimes I would meet survivors, and occasionally I'd meet another survivor activist, which was great. So, it started to build momentum. Like I think in Slovakia, I went to the parliament and explained what they needed to change. And he launched a motion in their parliament within 3 days. And then in Hungary, I think I spoke there. And I was invited to speak at the National Crime Conference. And all I said was, if my uncle sexually abused me here in Hungary, you would not have arrested him. You would leave a repeat child sex offender with 4 known victims completely free and working with school children. And they said, no, that's not true. And I said, it is true, because the head of your police has just shown me your penal code, and that's exactly what's happening. And then 9 months later, they abolished it, because that conversation happened in front of their national press. So you're a kind of agitator as an activist. I think if we go back to the 80s and people trying to get recognition for suffering from AIDS, and they had to lie down in the road to get people to listen that something has to change. I think with activism, you need to be very targeted. You have to have a specific ask, and you have to get in front of the people who can change it. So it started to build, but it changed in Croatia, because in Croatia, I asked the government to abolish the law, and they said we can't remove that law because we've just created it, we've just brought that in. And I was like, why would you bring in a limitation when other countries are in the process of removing it? And they told me about the Lanzarote Convention. So just to be clear, the EU is a collection of European countries, but not all of them. The Europe is much bigger. It's actually 47 countries. So Norway and Switzerland and Russia are obviously not in the EU. So those countries, all of Europe meets in Strasbourg at the Council of Europe. This is not the European Parliament, that's the EU. Everyone meets in Strasbourg. Strasbourg has a treaty called the Lanzarote Convention. In 2007, the countries came together and had the basic minimum standards for child protection. In that treaty, it says your country's limitation must be sufficient to allow victims time to make the report. There's two problems with that. It's really vague. And the second one is it doesn't really, well, it assumes that your country has a limitation. It says your country's limitation. So Croatia interpreted that as, they didn't have one at the time. We need to create a limitation. So they brought in this law, and in the process of ratifying a treaty that was to make the world safer for kids, they actually made it much more dangerous. So once I pointed that out to them, I then realized I need to go to Strasbourg and speak to that committee and get that document changed. So I phoned Strasbourg. This sounds ridiculous now when I think about that. I just phoned up the Council of Europe and went, who do I need to speak to? And because I'd written to Pope Francis and I was granted an audience with the Pope, because of that, then they were like, okay, who is this guy? And so they granted me the opportunity. So when I got there, I met the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, who nobody knows, but he's like the Grand High Wizard of Europe. He's the head of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee.
Right, okay.
And so I said, I walked with, he was doing his PR, he was walking with the survivor activist in a kilt. But whilst I was talking to him, I was like, when can I speak to your committee? And he granted me that opportunity. So which was great. To get 47 governments in one room saves you a lot of walking. So where are we now? That's 2015. So then, yeah. So if we want to jump to today, there's a lot happened, but I'm now a founding member of the Brave Movement, which is a global initiative. We got $10 million funding, and it's basically survivor activists like myself, but from across the world. And we got together and we got 10 million to do a campaign or global initiative to end childhood sexual violence across the world. So within that, we have different task forces, and I'm on the task force, the Statute of Limitations Task Force. And there's myself, there's a Spanish activist, Bolivian activist, incredible. Brisa in Bolivia has just managed to get the statute of limitations abolished in Bolivia. And the rest of the task force are like lawyers, high-end lawyers. We're talking like top of the world, like these guys are in the White House and stuff. And we meet every month, and we're strategizing and focusing on how do we do this. The Brave Movement is massive, but one thing that I do now, my new position within the Brave Movement is I'm the special representative at the Council of Europe. So I now have a seat amongst all these governments. In fairness, it's only 46 governments because Russia's been kicked out. But the Brave Movement have appointed me as the observer status. This organization, sorry, it's not an organization, it's a movement. The movement have been granted observer status. And the other observers are like UNICEF and ECPAT, huge world NGOs. Yeah. And the movement, we launched on March 3rd, and already we have a seat. We get to contribute and help steer the conversation with so it's the Brave Movement. If you've not heard of it, go Brave Movement, Google it, check it out. There's a lot going on.
Absolutely, I've written it down there. So I honestly, how far this has come is absolutely staggering. What an amazing, I guess, movement journey to come from. This is look when you kind of put, I guess when you put the start the healing and kind of, you know, all of the steps to kind of, which you talk about in your audiobook as well, about those steps and phases of healing, about 10 truths, and to kind of go through that to where you are now is, it's not just inspirational, it's kind of quite, like I said, it's quite staggering, I think, just what can happen when you put your mind to it. But what I want to ask you is, go back to, because you've talked a lot there about survivors, about survivor activists, about, you know, how this movement has kind of come on, but also then, you know, we're talking about healing. For anybody that watches this, listens to this, who may fall into that category themselves, or they know someone that does, what would you say for you as the, you know, as the most important first step for somebody that, you know, be it that they're in, you know, early stages, later stages of life, and haven't started this healing process yet?
I'd say if you're in Scotland, phone the Moira Anderson Foundation. It doesn't matter what age you are. Or I created a website called helpnearme.info. Helpnearme.info. I've just handed over management of that site to an organisation who are much bigger than me, because I'm an individual. They're going to expand it and make sure that every single NGO who supports survivors, no matter where they live on the planet, will be able to go to that site and find their local support services. But I mean, like, being an activist for me, like walking around Europe, that's insane. I mean, I kind of felt I had to do that. And when I look at why I did that, there's different reasons why I did that. And I think there's 4 reasons. And the first one, and I'll be honest, 2% of it was revenge, because my uncle told me, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I got older now, suddenly I was on kids' TV. So I have a bit of a platform. The Daily Record were reprinting everything I'm saying. And he said, don't tell anyone. And then he goes to prison and he tries to hide the fact that he's in prison. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to tell 500 million people in 30 languages. You know, I'm going to tell the Pope. It's like, so that I get that was 2% of my rage.
Yeah. Just on that, rage of what you said to the Pope, it was a bit in your book that for something that's extremely sensitive, it actually, it didn't, I'm not saying it made me laugh, but it took me unawares when you spoke about that audience with the Pope, and you had this idea of what you might say to him, and yet then when you met him, you said to him,
I said, Papa, my uncle abused me. And yeah. I think because what
was his response to that?
So being raised Catholic and then discovering that you're gay, I have a very complicated relationship with the Catholic Church, which is, you know, I believe in God and I have faith. I don't appreciate much of what they do. So when I met the Pope, half of my brain was saying, this guy's the head of the organization who systematically cover up pedophilia and move around sex offenders, and, you know, but the other half of my brain was totally indoctrinated with my childhood, going, this man is God. His words are God's words. And so, you know, when he's in front of you, it's like meeting Santa Claus. It's like, this is him, you know, and he's just this old Argentinian guy. But, you know, the weird thing is, if you met someone, if you met an old man and he put his hand on my shoulder, at one point he put his hand on the side of my face when I was talking. He was so tactile, but weirdly, that was fine. If you met an old person you didn't know and they kept touching you, you'd feel like, mate, get back. It was so disarming, and for me, it was profoundly validating. Because when I said, because I just kind of had this spiel, which was, I wanted him to say that, I just wanted him to say that if you were sexually abused in childhood, it wasn't your fault. Because if the Pope said that, that would be God saying that. And that would be transformative for billions of people who live life feeling guilty and feeling shame, and somehow it was their fault. If he would say that, it's just release so many people from torment. And I had prepared this spiel, and it just went out the window when I met him. And suddenly I was just this child who'd been abused, and suddenly I was talking to God, and I was just like, this wasn't fair, you know.
Yeah.
And that's why I've walked here, to tell you that. I just want you, I want to know that you see me.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that, I think. So that was one of the other reasons. One of the reasons I did it was for revenge. Another reason was that weird Catholic self-punishment, feeling that it was your fault, like I deserve this. Like walking in the rain for, with a chest infection, and just sleeping in a van with no heating and in the snow, thinking this is part of you that's really dysfunctional, going, this is what I deserve. And then another part of me, which was this: if you've been used throughout your formative years, as your brain's developing, you become, as a child, I think until age 7, and then the next one into puberty. If throughout all those developmental stages you are being regularly used like a sex toy and then dropped, you have absolutely no concept of your self-worth. You don't know if you have any value in this world. And so for me, having to walk to all these countries to make an impact, to save, to encourage a legislative change over a territory of 820 million people, so that I can see that on paper and go, I contributed to that. So that means I do have value in this life, which is really sad. But, to understand it now, that was partly why I did it, is that I needed to feel that my life had a point. But the fourth reason, which I think was part of it as well, is just that thing about, when you're in a supermarket and there's a little lady trying to reach the porridge oats on the top shelf and she just can't reach them, and you can see what's happening, and you just reach up and you get it and you hand it to her. You don't even wait for her to say, son, can you get that? You can just see this person needs that and they can't do that. So for me, I was a survivor. I'd done a lot of healing, and I was on TV, and I was a playwright, and I was like, hang on, I've got a voice here and millions don't have a voice. So it was just natural that I was like, I need to speak out because I can, that was, so yeah, that was.
Yeah, I completely get that. It was almost like an obligation to kind of to use that platform for good.
Yeah, and I think, like I was saying with kids, like, I shouldn't call them kids. Kids are like goats. Children, they are
Young people, they like to call them these days.
young people.
Yeah, my wife
Yeah.
works in the school. That's what I'm told. Young people.
But
Young people are preferred.
Yeah, I think the Brave movement officially is ending sexual violence against children and young people. I think that's the official thing. But yeah, I think it's because weirdly I was on kids' TV. That's kind of little ones. Yeah. Sorry, I'm moved house this morning. I'm a bit tired. My head keeps going away.
Listen, one of the things that you mentioned in the book, I absolutely love, and I've never heard this analogy. I heard a lot of analogies about emotions, but you say that emotions are like a phone ringing inside, and that phone will keep ringing until you answer it. I love that. I love that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's natural to want to avoid anything uncomfortable. I mean, that's human nature, is move towards pleasure and away from pain. And if you have an emotion that's going to be uncomfortable to sit and look at, of course you're going to avoid it, but it's never going to go away. So it's like I say, it's a phone that keeps ringing. But if you just turn and face it, or sit in it, just sit with it. Emotion is energy in motion, and then it'll pass through you. Like you'll just go through it, and then it's like you've hung up the phone. It's fine. But we don't do that. We drink and we eat sugar, and we watch Netflix. We do anything but look at the stuff that our being is asking us to address. So, and I'm not saying it's easy, but it's, the more you sit with that discomfort and release those things, then the more you get a grip of your authentic self, I think.
Yeah, you touched on there the things that we will do to avoid acknowledging those kind of hard sort of truths that you can, and again that I think the way that you put it was that we numb. You can numb that pain, you can numb that emotion, and kind of avoid addressing it by drinking, or by taking drugs, or by eating sort of fatty junk food, etc., all of which will, like the way you said, junk food will make you fat and ultimately make you ill. Drinking, it can make you a lot of things and ultimately make you ill. Drugs make you a bit crazy and ultimately make you ill. And making yourself more ill as an alternative to addressing the real pain.
Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, it's called The Truth That No One Tells Teenagers. And that's because I wrote the book to be digestible for about a 12-year-old and up, but it's written
that
for...
explains probably why I understood every word of it then.
But I think for people can be any age and not have begun their healing. So I wanted the book to be, and apparently adult survivors do say they wish they'd found this book sooner. So,
and it's available on Audible.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean it's available on Amazon. You can buy the paperback or the Kindle. You say audiobook, it's just a book, but there's the audio version.
It's the audiobook I had as well. So you can get the book, the paperbacks on Amazon as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Shall we do another song?
Aye.
There's two more. Which one would... In fact, let's go with Jose Marie Chan's version of A Christmas Carol, because it's almost December.
Yeah. I think there's a Christmas... Jose Marie Chan, I was in a restaurant and I heard him singing this song and I used Shazam and I realized that it was him singing it. But that song is the opening credits of Scrooge, The Christmas Carol with Albert Finney, which was filmed in 1970. And two reasons I love it. My dad and my brother and I used to watch that every Christmas Eve. So for me, it's when I hear that music, it's Christmas Eve. But secondly, because I'm obsessed with Dickens. Like as a writer, he's a huge inspiration. And in particular, the Christmas Carol for me is, I think, the greatest story ever told. Some say it's the Bible. I think it's Christmas Carol because it's about a man who has the privilege of being shown the error of his ways and how his own actions and selfishness has made him miserable, and how the way he is and the way he sees the world has isolated himself and made other people really unhappy. And he learns, like he goes back and looks, and then he looks at how it is today, and then he sees the future, and then he's able to change that, and he becomes kind, and he starts, he becomes what he could have always been had he not just taken a moment to get a grip of himself. I think that's just the lesson that I think everyone should. And I think, how many versions of Scrooge are there? Every year there's a new version. I think there's one this year with Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds. I think it's a new version. It's just the retold story in so many different incarnations. There's with that one with Bill Murray, Scrooged, and so many different musical ones. But for me, the Albert Finney one is the ultimate one, because Albert Finney's just a god. He's incredible. And obviously it's Dickens. Last time I was in New York, I went to the Morgan Library, and I saw they have Dickens' ledger where he wrote Christmas Carol. They have his, because it was before typewriters, he wrote it. And you can see he writes a line and then he scribbles it out, and then he writes another line. You can see him creating this on the page as he's figuring out the story, which is now the words that we know, if you know the book. It's one of the most beautiful things. Like, one of my life's ambitions is to buy a first edition. It's a total doodad. I think they're about $4,000, but I really want to own one. It's for me, a really beautiful story.
So you talking of the future, or the ghost of Christmas yet to come, whichever way we put it. What does that? I mean, where does Matthew McVarish go next? What does the future hold for you?
I'm getting married, and very excited about that.
9 days.
Yeah, I'm getting married. That's the next thing. I'm in London next week for Brave Movement. The Brave Movement guys in Washington are going to be in London, so I'm going down. So I'm starting to write for BBC. I'm doing writing River City. So that's the new job starting just after the wedding. And I'll be going over to Strasbourg in January for the Council of Europe plenary, just to push our statute of limitation stuff again. And I'm writing a play for the Oran Moor, the lunchtime theatre play, A Pint a Pint. It's the final. Yeah, I've written 2 before, so this is like the 3rd in the trilogy. That'll be next year.
Yeah.
Starring Andrew Agnew, he was in Ballamore, he was PC Plum.
I was going to say, I know that name as well, Andrew Agnew. Yeah.
Yeah, and Rory Ford is also in it. He's an actor from Largs, I think.
Right. So there's a lot going on. Getting married and starting with River City, back over to more statute of limitations. So how do you fit all of this
in? I'll see.
See how it goes.
Yeah.
What about anyone? What about anyone that anything that you've said tonight kind of resonates and they feel that they'd like to, be a little bit more involved in kind of helping any of the, be it looking at Brave Movement, thinks that, wow, this is such a good cause. They'd like to do something themselves and they don't perhaps want to walk 10,000 miles across Europe, but
yeah, loads of things. I think, if you're a survivor and you've never spoken about it, you don't have to tell Rupert Murdoch. You can tell someone you trust. I think there's a perception these days that as soon as you open your mouth, that there's going to be press at your door. That's not going to happen. But if you're just someone who wants to change the world or change the world around you, we can do little things like if you have kids, if you have children, I should stop using that word. If you have children, before they go to bed tonight, or maybe they're in bed now, but before they go to bed tomorrow, you just say to them, do you know that there's nothing you can't speak to me about? And a lot of people, when you say that, they go, oh, my children definitely know that. I'm like, well, it won't hurt to keep repeating that very clearly to them every so often. And so create a culture in your house that there's nothing that they cannot discuss with you, because that alone would be change the entire world. If we could literally, because I'm not saying that they will already have been abused and they need to tell you about it. I'm just saying that actually, if you create a culture where there's complete openness and authenticity, then you'll be able to know if there's something going on, and you don't need to get to the point where they suddenly come to you because they have to and something's occurred,
Yeah, I kind of think that epitomizes. You talked about living the truth, right?
Yeah,
living the truth. What does that? What does that look like for you? Living the truth. I think we've kind of covered it all in the last hour, really, haven't we?
I think it's about, and we're starting to do this as a country, is that mental health we're starting to recognize that your brain is an organ like your kidneys, and sometimes it's not working very well, and you need to get help. And I say in the book, if you broke your leg, you would go straight to hospital. But if you're suffering from anxiety and having panic attacks, a lot of people would try and hide that instead of going and getting help. It's the same thing. It's a different part of your system. Just as, so yeah, living the truth for me is about being very open about. And when meetings on Brave Movement, we do grounding before. At the start of the session, we do a grounding with breath, and then we talk about some heavy stuff. And we meet. We've got Interpol and everyone trying to catch all the online images and stuff. What we have to talk about is horrendous. And I come off a Zoom meeting and I need to, breathe and stare at the wall for a minute. But, just sometimes saying in a meeting, I'm triggered, guys. I just need to walk around the block and stuff like that. That's living the truth, saying I'm a survivor. When I was a child, I was sexually abused, and that means that today, sometimes I just can't think. Like tonight, this has been great, but when we started talking about my mum, I was like, God, this is not as heavy as it's a lot heavier than I thought it was going to be. Just being transparent about that, and you were immediately. You actually said, and I think that's the beautiful thing. I think that's living the truth, is starting to, what two men who are growing up talking about, I'm feeling emotional right now. That wouldn't be a statement made even 5 years ago,
Yeah, and I think that even today it's still hard. It's still hard for a lot of people to accept that, you know, one, they have emotions and that it's cool to talk about themselves, but also, you know, on the flip side of that as well, that, you know, acknowledging other people's emotions as well, right?
Yeah, and that's it. I think we're moving to a happier place when we can be not okay. It's okay to not be okay, you know. But it was such a pleasure meeting you, because I met you through my friend Steve.
Yeah, we have to give him a bit of a shout out, don't we?
Stevie, yeah.
Listen, he dropped at 8:15. Like, he popped on a message here. I thought we'll talk about him at some point in time. My two favourite Scotsmen, he said.
Stevie boy, yeah.
Indeed. And it was, I think, quite a fortuitous meeting, and I think even more so now, having spoken to you in a little bit more depth, having listened to the book as well. We'll keep in touch. But I'm not finished yet, because there's still one tune left. And,
okay.
And I'd like to close on lightening the mood a little bit.
Okay.
And hopefully you'll like it as well. But let's talk a little bit about Norah Jones and Come Away With Me.
Okay, I apologise that you know, and as a gay man, that is the gayest song I could have suggested. The reason that I love that song is because I use it as like Pavlov's dog. Every time I'm on a beach or when I'm up the Highlands and you've just got that place when it's just deep peace, I play that song, and that means that I've kind of sensorial attachment to it. So now when I'm out in a situation where I'm triggered and, you know, we've had to have a heavy discussion, I can listen to that song and it'll just reset me as well. And so, like, I don't listen to it like just on your average day. It's very I listen to it when I'm lying on a beach or when I'm in, you know, in a tranquil loch. And that means that when I listen to that song and I'm completely relaxed, then I can use that song when I'm not. You know, and it's such a beautiful song. And my James and I, we go up to the Highlands. I've got a caravan in Glenwig, and that's our happy place. And we get in the sea at like 6 a.m. and all your crazy stuff. That's what we do, you know. And I didn't do any of that stuff until this year when I met Steve on a training course. And I think I met Steve. It was in March, and you know, when you meet, there's got light shining. You meet someone who's got light shining at their eyes, and I surprised myself. I said, I want to be your friend, which is not something you say to people when, you know, when you're grown up. You might say that when you're 6. And I just said it, and then we've became like accountability pals, and I'm in a little group with the boys, and it's really transformed my life. I've got so much more done this year than I've ever been able to achieve because of Steve and Ollie and Matt, and this kind of we support each other and stuff, and we text each other every day, every morning we check in, and we share with each other what's going on. And I've got a new group of pals, and I think as you get older, it's harder to make friends. But yeah, so it's been a beautiful year, actually, now that I think about it. So I've forgotten your question.
It wasn't a question that I wrote down, but what do you think why do you think that is then, that accountability? What do you think, why has that kind of helped you achieve so much more? Where's the power in that for you?
I think because life is not a rehearsal, you know, you do have a limited amount of time. I think, you know, you can contribute to the world as much as you want to, but, you know, if you've got good-hearted people who just want to see you do well, and you share with them, this is what I want to do, and they're going to nudge you until you do what you said you would do. And when you love and respect these people, you don't want to let them down. So you say, guys, I'm going to do this. Life would be good if I did do that. It'd be much nicer if I sat on the couch and watched Netflix and ate a pizza. But I've said to the guys, I'm going to do this. So, and so you build a momentum and you move forward. And it's not just about goals and setting goals. It's a kind of, there is a real transparency with mental health in the group. And if we're struggling with something, we can put that out there. So I think I would encourage everyone to find someone that you can be authentic with, you know.
Brilliant. And you talked about that moment of like kind of lying on the beach there. right? Just kind of skipping back a little bit. Let's close a little bit lighter. You'll know some of these questions.
Okay.
So where is that beach for you? Where is that place for you? That idea of heaven, or that idea of just tranquility, that your favorite place in the world. Let's go with somewhere you've not been yet, a beach that you would like to lie on.
Okay. Well, I want to go to Tahiti for the honeymoon. I've never been.
Oh,
but you know those little wooden huts on the sea that you have to walk along, like kind of.
Oh, yes.
You can like glass bottomed kind of hut, and you've got sharks beneath you. I'd love to go there. I think because when you're gay, there's very few places that you can go that are safe. Like in Jamaica, would be beaten to death, and so you can't go in a lot of the typical honeymoon places. They're not safe. So Tahiti, because the indigenous community there, the LGBT people are kind of believed to be twin spirited, that you have male and female energy, and in their culture we're respected. So it's a very safe place to go for us.
That's nice. And will James be happy that you're taking Nora with you as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, couple more questions then. I do believe this was here. Favorite color?
Red.
Red. Any particular reason?
It's the color of passion, I think, which is anger mixed with love.
And what about if it's not on the list, or say not on the list, but these are special songs, your favorite song of all time?
Oh God. I think I always say "Let It Be" by the Beatles.
Nice. And what feelings sort of come over you when you hear that song?
Just like, because when you're raised Catholic and because that's a religious song in a way, he talks about being overwhelmed and Mother Mary comes to him. And I remember that my brother, when he was not well, and he had, when you go to the priest when you're Catholic and they're like a therapist, and he was trying to say all the right prayers and all the right words, and they're like really long, and you're supposed to know the right words. And the priest said to him, "Your prayer is God, it's Edward. That's your prayer." So you just show up. And I love that. And there's something in Let It Be about that. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. So it's just about showing up to God and saying, this is overwhelming. I'm doing my best here, but I don't know what to do.
I thought these last questions would be a little bit lighter.
Sorry. I don't go to dinner parties anymore. I always drag down the mood.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, two more.
Yep.
I'm wondering which. Oh no, let's go with this. This is the penultimate one for you. Okay. Two famous people, dead or alive, that you can go for a pint with, or a coffee, or your libation of choice. Who would they be?
Two famous people. Harvey Milk. I'd love to meet Harvey Milk. You know Harvey Milk, yeah?
I don't. No.
Oh, okay. He was shot in 1978. He was the first openly gay. Like in San Francisco, he ran for city council, and he was shot, and the mayor was shot. But he basically started the whole gay rights movement, which it started in San Francisco but moved around the world. He's a legend, and he's an activist and a politician. But if you've ever seen the movie Milk with Sean, I was going to say Sean Penn. Is it Sean Penn?
Oh,
right, it's Sean Penn. Yeah.
I've heard of that. Right. Okay, that's one to add to the list. Then.
I'd love to meet him, and just Beckham. I'd love to just to look at him. Just up close. Yeah.
No, so listen, I get that. He's a gorgeous man, right?
I know he's politically tricky just now because of the whole Qatar thing, and
Yeah.
But yeah. But he was my first calendar, I think.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, last question.
Okay.
You've written a book. You've written a number of plays. If you were to write the book of the story of your life. Has that already been written then? I'm kind of thinking, is this To Kill a Kelpie? If you let's roll the let's do this a little bit differently, because crikey, you've already done it all. Let's roll the clock forward. Don't do this. I've not done this one before. I'm thinking on the hop. Okay. So let's say you're 39, right? Okay, yeah. Let's a nice round number. Let's give you another 60 years. All right.
Okay.
And at 99, you're thinking, do you know what? Now it's time to write my autobiography. What's it called?
What is it called?
Yeah.
I tried. That's it.
I think what is it you said? I think not only did you try, I think you succeeded already. I'll tell you what you've told everyone else in your book, and I hope that you've accepted this by now. You are, as the Americans would say, awesome. So I think that yeah, honestly, listen, thank you so much for coming on, and it's been absolute pleasure. It really has. Eye-opening, emotional. You've choked me up more than once this evening. But I hope that anybody listening, more than anything else, what an inspirational journey, and what an inspirational human being you are. So thank you very much indeed for coming on.
Thank you, man. And thank you so much for your course. Like, I'm definitely going to be back with you in some ice. I think I needed that day, and it really was more than I imagined it was going to be. You are a frighteningly healthy looking person for a Scotsman. I thought you were my age. I was like, wow. But bless you.
Yeah, well, listen, you're more than welcome. And like I said, the dates are lined up. It'd be brilliant to see you again. I've just last Sunday, I went along. I found another group of crazy people, known as the Edinburgh Blue Balls. I kid you not. This is like, there's about 30 of them on Sunday. The group's growing. They get together at Portobello Beach, and most of them wear budgie smugglers, which is a little bit disconcerting. I don't know. You might like it. I don't know. I wore shorts, but we went in the sea for 15 minutes, had a natter. Yeah, it's kind of nice finding like-minded souls. So yeah, absolutely any time. Listen, any messages for anybody watching before we go? I'm going to ask you to just stay in the studio for just 2 minutes.
Okay.
Any parting words for our viewers?
Just take a breath. Just breathe.
What other way could we end on that? Matthew McVarish, thank you so much. And for those watching this evening, or whenever you watch or listen, thanks for tuning in again to another JFDI podcast. Until the next time,